You're listening to Reimagining Leadership, episode number 90. My guest today is all about building courage in her clients. She hosts an incredible podcast called Brave by Design. She is also known as the force of badassery. And after having a conversation with her several times now, I would have to say it's true. And I will tell you, this to me was a great episode, especially the environment we're in right now, talking about how do we do that? How do we build courage? And I think you'll find that there are some interesting perspectives in terms of how we do this and do it together. Again, you're listening to Reimagining Leadership. And the evolution of this podcast really is about how do we learn to lead like no other? Well, it first starts with reimagining what that looks like. And that's what this podcast is all about. So why don't we get into it? Laura, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've been looking forward to this. As I've mentioned in the intro, which you're not hearing right now, is you are the force of badassery, and I love that. A couple things that stood out to me as I was reading some of your background was that you combine teaching the habit of courage with business know-how. And I think both of those are so important in the environment that we're in right now. And I was hoping that we could maybe go down that path and see where we end up in terms of the clients that you deal with or the people you deal with. How do you do that right now in terms of develop that habit of courage?
Well, let me take a step back and let's talk about why I combine these two things. Because I've worked with clients, so some of you who are listening to this may know or are learning that, I ran a very successful consulting business for a number of years doing marketing consulting for huge companies. And when people started asking me to speak and teach on this stuff, I would tell them, here's the business know-how. Here's how you do it, okay? And these are steps that anyone can learn, right? I can teach you how to write a contract. I can teach you how to talk to a client. I can teach you how to sell. But what I began to notice was that I can give you those steps, but if you do not have a foundation in self-worth, you will find all kinds of ways to delay yourself, to self-sabotage, to throw up roadblocks, and not succeed and stay where you are, because where you are may feel safer to you than where you want to go, because where you want to go is unknown to you. And that's why I began talking more about developing the habit of courage, because we can give you the map. It's not a secret of how to do these things, of how to build a business, of how to rise in your career. But if you don't believe in yourself, if you're not courageous, I guarantee you're going to have a real hard time doing it. So that's why I've combined those two, to make it a little bit easier for people to address some of the very critical mindset techniques that we can begin to use and employ today to feel more courageous. Especially in those really challenging circumstances where we are afraid to speak up, or we are scared of what someone will think of us if we put our necks out there or we try something different. And that's where the courage piece comes in, because it's sometimes we're more conditioned to shrink than to shine.
Totally. Now, before we started this, you had mentioned the negativity bias. And I was wondering if you could speak to that in terms of where does that fit in this, in terms of the habit of courage?
Yeah. So folks, we are all programmed with a negativity bias. So that means that we are all programmed to think, oh my gosh, like this scary thing is happening and I'm going to go to the worst case scenario. That's how we are trained to think. That's how we survived millions of years ago, right? So that's very normal. So I want to first say, if you immediately go to like worst case scenario, that's okay. But here's where we get intentional about developing that courage muscle. Courage is a muscle, just like anxiety, stress, and overwhelm are muscles. So how do we begin to develop that muscle when we fall into the negative? I want you to think about this question. What are the 25 benefits of this situation to my values, to furthering my values, and to furthering my mission on this planet? Think about that. Now, that question can be very challenging for certain people to answer, because they'll immediately say, Laura, there's nothing. There's nothing good. I can't find anything. What a dumb exercise. Well, think about what's important to you. Is family something that you really value that's very important to you? How is this crisis helping you to further strengthen your relationship with your family? Tell me 10, 25 ways. I love to get about 25, because that's when we begin to see that negativity bias is suppressed. The nervous system calms down a little bit, and we can see how everything is not in our way. It is actually on our way to achieving our highest potential. And when we use and develop that habit of courage, and just start with that one simple technique, you will begin to think, instead of this being the worst thing ever, why is this the best thing ever?
I love that. And I love how you talk about putting the number out there of 25, because the easy thing to do is say, let's think of three things. And if it's only three, then that negativity bias will overtake it
Creeps
again.
back in.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you're almost building this, how thick can I get this shell around me to defend myself against this negative bias?
And you know what I'll say is, when I do this, like with my clients and they're working with me, I make them get to 200. I mean, now that's no easy feat. Okay. That's no easy feat.
Oh, I'm exhausted right now.
Podcast's over. We're done. No, but it's not easy to, it's not easy to do that. But you'll notice as you begin to do this exercise, and I tell everyone, do it until you have tears of joy, tears of inspiration, tears of gratitude for the challenge that is in front of you. What I tell everyone is that we grow right at the border between support and challenge. So, what does that mean? That means that if I'm living my life and I am so incredibly challenged by everything going on and I just cannot function and I cannot find the support, I'll give up. Conversely, if I grow up in an environment and I never have a problem in my life, I've got, a free flowing access to money, to everything my heart could ever desire, what happens? Well, I become really lazy, right? And we see this happen with people. We see people who feel extremely defeated by challenge, and we see people who are wildly unmotivated and uninspired to do anything with their life because they don't need to. So how do we get out of that? How do we get out of that negativity bias? Is we begin to develop courage. We begin to see, what challenges do I want to go after? And how are the challenges that are currently appearing in my life actually supporting me? And when you can bring equilibrium, that's why we do that exercise. When we can bring equilibrium and see that this event has both the support and challenge that are helping me fulfill what I am here to do. And I talk a lot about that. And I don't know what the belief system of the folks in the audience is, but I do truly believe that we are all here to do something great with our lives. That's pretty core to what I believe. So if you agree with that, then instead of seeing these challenges as insurmountable obstacles, let's see these challenges as our greatest opportunities. I'm going to tell you what, there are people who are, we can divide the world into a couple types of people now. There are people who are thinking like this, and there are people who are giving into their fear and giving into distress, who are paralyzed. And the people who are beginning to think in this way and thinking, how can I best serve over the next 12 to 24 months as we face this crisis? Because guys, this is not a 2-week or 1-month issue. We are forever changed and impacted. And by the way, the effects we're seeing for this current pandemic will continue. This is not the end of it. So let's get realistic. It's coming back. There will be other waves of it. Of course, we're going to get more control over it when we get a vaccine and that type of thing. But until then, think about, what are the opportunities for me to best serve in this crisis? Because our highest potential is always in service to others. Always. If you are sitting on the couch eating the bag of potato chips and Netflix, for 6 months, who is that in service to? That's not in service to anyone,
Yeah.
you know? That doesn't help anyone. But when we can say, no, I need to rise above that. I need to find what are the benefits for me in this situation? What are the benefits for me from my natural gifts, talents, to share with the world? Then we can really be of service. Then we can really help our communities and help this world to unite in this incredible, incredible conflict.
Yeah. And you hit on so many things that are trying to unpack here. One is, I think of, to me, this is a dress rehearsal. What we're going through right now is a dress rehearsal for
Mm,
many things to come down the road in terms of how we approach them, behave toward each other. The other thing that I think about when you were saying that is all the research out there in regards to belongingness, that
mm,
we need each other. We cannot get through this without each other. And there is such a myth around self-made. Nobody is self-made unless you made the roads you're driving on, the car you're in, the roof that's over your head, that you made the food you're
mm,
eating. Right? It sounds absurd. That's it. That said, what I do believe is that we can be and need to be self-motivated. That there
yeah,
needs to be our ability to drive from inside, but
yeah.
we all need each other to get through this. And lastly, as it relates to this idea of it needs to be more than just about myself. As you probably are familiar, how much research is out there that says when they looked at income levels and other components, what really provided the most happiness for people was those that had a purpose. Those
Mm,
individuals that had a purpose were those that found themselves to be experience the most well-being and to be the happiest. And to me, purpose is about it's about being for others.
absolutely. Patrick, I love that. One of the questions I always wake up and ask myself every day, and I'm not, and I want to preface this by saying I'm not a particularly religious person, but this is more a question I ask to my higher self is I'll say, how can I best be of service today? How can I help today? And you start the day with that kind of thought, and you will begin to see opportunities appear. So, we have control over those thoughts, right? And to your point, man, isolation, there's so many things about the internet that have been incredible and wonderful and revolutionary, but never have people felt so isolated, so disconnected. Never have we seen such high levels of inability to cope, stress, and anxiety in society when we are, quote unquote, more connected than ever.
Yeah,
And I think that,
totally agree.
yeah, and I think that this period is teaching us exactly like you said, nobody does it on their own. And we have lived in a culture that's a lot about self-made, self-reliance. You can do it. And yeah, you can do it, but it takes a village. And the things that I'm seeing in my community, and I imagine you're seeing as well, man, I am so inspired by how people are pulling together to help, for example, our hospital staff, or to help our kids in need who need a lunch or a dinner,
Yeah.
or who are helping our elderly folks. People are coming together in ways, I have a dog. I walk down the street, 2, 3 times a day with my dog to take her out. And thankfully, we're not in a very populated area, but I'm waving to the neighbors. I'm saying hi from across the street because we all when before what would we do? We'd take them for granted. We'd ignore them.
Yeah.
We'd say, "Oh, look away. I don't want to, I don't want to be seen." No, 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 no. We're learning about this community. We're learning about reconnecting to others, and I think it's really going to leave us in such a stronger place. But it is really interesting what you talk about this being a dress rehearsal. I kind of want to hear more about that.
Because I think in our lifetimes, we haven't really experienced this kind of challenge before. So you start to see how
Mm,
people interact with each other and how they behave toward each other. I think is it speaks to where do we go from here? What's the next challenge that we will deal with that is going to put us in a similar situation? And
mm.
what will we learn from this so that round two we understand
Yeah.
where we go next?
Exactly. Oh, I just love that. And I hope that people take that to heart, and really think about Because it's true. I don't think we've experienced this since probably World War II, which none of us were alive for. Our grandparents, or parents may have gone through this, but we certainly have not. And I think that we've gotten a little bit complacent, honestly. That's my opinion. I
Yeah.
think we have gotten very, very comfortable with, and again, let me talk about support and challenge for a second, because we've gotten really comfortable with being very, very supported challenged in other ways, but supported in certain ways where we have gotten very comfortable with sitting in front of the TV and witnessing life happening outside of us. And what's going on right now is a form of attack, right? It's a virus. But the difference for me and how I see it is that this virus is not from, it's not an agent brought from a foreign nation. It's just a thing going around the world. There's nobody outside of us to attack. There's nobody outside of us to fight. There's nobody to say, hey, you're the one, this is your fault. No, no, no. That's not real. So what can we do, right? The only thing we can do to heal right now, the only thing we can do to quote unquote fight this, is to go within and heal ourselves. That's the only way. And to me, that's an incredibly profound lesson in what's happening. And how do we heal ourselves? How do we become more reconnected with ourselves? How do we slow down? How do we do self-care? How do we really take this time to realign and reset around what our dreams are, to spend more times with our family, and to really reconnect with the land and our communities? And so when we think about this form of quote unquote war or attack, boy, that's my perspective on it. I mean, I don't know if you share that, but I think it's a very profound gift that we are actually experiencing. And that's my choice to see it that way. I fully recognize other people may see this as the worst thing ever. But like I said, in the Habit of Courage, what we talk about is every challenge is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
And the bigger the challenges, the bigger the opportunity.
Right. So a lot of your work is around mindset, which really
Yes.
that's what this all is. To me, to piggyback off of what you're talking about, I think there's so much here in regards to experiencing our own vulnerability, right? Who would have ever thought
Mm,
something that we can't even see can
yeah.
have this great an impact on a globe,
Yeah.
on all of us. And to me, that is part of the strength here, is that when we can, I am a huge advocate of vulnerability in the work,
Mm,
and we can probably dovetail into here around emotional intelligence, because we had this conversation prior to starting the interview, is that we're seeing more interest in emotional intelligence. And I first started with emotional intelligence about in 2008 when I started my company. That's when I had gotten involved with emotional intelligence.
and Patrick, by the way, boy, what a time to start a company. Talk about a crisis.
Right, right,
But
exactly.
that's incredible.
And again, but it speaks to there's a way out, right? One of the things that I will talk about is I think your past is your power. Your past
Mm,
is your power. And 10 minutes ago was our past. What do
mhm.
we learn from that that we go forward and we navigate a better place going forward? That's all we have. People that say,
Yeah.
oh, you can't live in the past. Totally agree with that. What we need to do is leverage our past, because that's all that we have. How do we know if I don't remember my past, I wouldn't know how to get home again, because I
Right.
need to know the route to take to get home.
Yep.
It's unless I'm going to use a GPS every place that I go, I need to understand my past.
And what I hear you saying, and I guess the language I would put it in is, it's important for individuals, it is wise to not be a victim of your history, but a master of your destiny. So we take the
Beautiful.
past and we incorporate those lessons that we have learned and those gifts we have received along the way into, how am I going to set forth? What is my next step? And why am I so grateful to be alive on this planet? I'll tell you, one of the greatest gifts for me in this whole experience is the gift of presence, the gift of appreciating every single morning when I call my parents, who I haven't been able to see now for quite a while. how grateful I am to hear their voices in a way that I was never grateful before. How grateful I am to hear that we are all healthy. You know, we take that stuff for granted.
Yeah.
We don't even, we're just like, oh yeah, they're fine, whatever. You know, that day that, you know, when we go home, that day is so far off, it's sort of a mystery. Well, guys, that day could be here any day.
Yeah.
And so thinking about what legacy do I want to leave for my community, for my family, for my world? Oh, what a beautiful question to start asking right now. I want to say for people who are listening who might find that a little overwhelming, like what, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? Become the next MLK Jr.? No, I mean, do what you can do. That may mean being a great parent. That may mean giving your kids an extra hug. That may mean leading with love instead of hate in your heart. Um, it doesn't have to be these huge acts. Remember, the people that we see, you know, in the media or we see out in front and on top, they have a whole group of people holding them up. Let's not forget about that. So that's what it makes me think about, you know. And I see so many people, I don't know if you see this, but I would probably guess you do. I see so many people who are either trying to escape the past and run towards the future, that they never realize how much they have actually accomplished in this moment.
Yeah.
they're never they never have a moment of gratitude to say, oh my gosh, this moment I have co-created is a product of so many of my dreams and desires and wants from the past, and here I am.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
And it's interesting you say that, because I certainly know those people, and I believe I've been one myself. And I would compare it to chasing your shadow. And you
Oh,
remember as a kid that when you try and, well, you're never going to catch it,
yeah.
but it's always right there with you. And I think it's the same thing with happiness or wanting to be in a better place, that we chase
Mm.
all of these other things. And if we just stopped, it's right inside of us. It's our shadow it's right there all the time. It's not
Patrick,
going
I
anywhere.
love talking to you. You're so much fun, and you're so, you know, I have to tell you, I know this isn't my podcast, but I'm going to take over for a second. One thing I love about talking to you, and I, maybe the audience will resonate with this, but it is so refreshing to hear this kind of insight from a man. I don't know if you've ever been told that before or felt that, but it is very refreshing, because a lot of times when we talk, especially about like vulnerability, when we talk about gratitude, when we talk about, you know, finding inner peace, these are things that we often hear from women who are kind of deemed like a little bit touchy feely, you know. And so I love that you bring that to the table. I think it's
Yeah.
really powerful.
Well, I will tell you, it was not always this way. And I will often say that I think when I go in and do workshops, especially around emotional intelligence, and the room that I might be in might be primarily males, I will say that I think as males, we've been sold a bill of goods that
Mm,
don't really exist, right?
yeah.
That has forced us to, be tough and rugged and all of these stuff.
Hmm.
And I grew up playing sports. I was a bouncer in college and at a bar. So I did all of those. And, I realized that when all was said and done, that it was my own insecurity that I tried to prop up through a lot of that sort of macho.
Bravado.
Yeah. Right. It
Yeah.
was my own insecurity. That was it. And it was once I started to realize that, it was like, it's exhausting to play that role.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Isn't it?
exhausting.
Yeah, it's really tiring. And we were saying earlier before we started recording, it's just so much easier to be yourself. I want to say something though on this emotional intelligence piece and understanding how to interact and engage with individuals. And that is that it's my belief that what I put out into the world, what I'm sharing with the world is an expression of my inner world. So, my outer world, how I talk to you, how I appear in the world, what I share, what I do is an expression of my inner beliefs, my inner thoughts, and what has brought me to this moment. And so when we are working with individuals and we are trying to understand them and we're trying to understand their perspectives and where they're coming from, and or we are feeling, you know, maybe a little offended by things that they've said, or we're feeling challenged, remember that All everyone is doing is giving you an outer expression of their inner reality. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense.
Okay.
This is really a whole separate episode that we need to do on this, because I truly believe that is that
Yeah.
talking about biases, right? We create
Oh
biases on
God.
other people in terms of how we perceive somebody, and we don't know really anything about them. I would say that we're like icebergs, right? We only see about 10%
Totally.
of the other person. We don't know the
Totally.
90% that is, it's their own backstory of why they behave the way that they do. And that's not to
Mm-hmm.
make excuses for people, but if we don't come to this place of trying to understand that just because you're different than me, rather than me judge you as being a bad person, you know what? For all I know, if I had to experience where you were, I would be in
Mm.
a worse place than you are now,
Yeah.
you
Oh
know?
my gosh, isn't that the truth? And to that point, I want to say, a lot of my work is with women, and there are some very real issues and differences that women face in the workplace, of course. But I just want to say this. If you are an individual or a woman, or it doesn't matter, you can be anyone, who keeps experiencing the same problem over and over and over like a broken record, and it's the same situation, it's the same problem, or you always jump, let's use a concrete example, you always jump to, they must not respect me because I'm a woman, or they must think I'm less than because I'm a woman. If that's a repeating thought for you that happens over and over and over, no matter where you go and who you're talking to, guess what? You're the common denominator. So what does that say about the thoughts in your head about how you talk to yourself? And I say that from a place of experience because I spent many years in the corporate world being told by male bosses in Silicon Valley, I needed to smile more, I needed to be nicer, I needed to soften my language, I needed to tone it down. And it really, really bothered me. And it seemed like no matter where I went as a full-time employee, I would attract that. I would find these people. And eventually I said, I'm the common denominator. The only thing I can do is change my experience. And that's when I started consulting, and everything changed. But I want to talk about, why was that happening to me? Why did I keep confronting these men who kept telling me I wasn't okay as I naturally am? And my belief is that that's because there was a little inner critic inside my head who was saying the same thing and was looking for confirmation of that in my external reality. And so I went to go find it. And so I found it. A very strong belief that, Laura, you're not good enough, you're too much, you can never be successful. And until I broke the cycle by leaving the full-time world and stepping into my leadership qualities and saying, F you, inner critic, that's when it all changed. And I was praised for being bold, determined, confident,
Right.
never came across it again.
Interesting. It really is in the coaching, and and I don't know, you probably have your own word for it, but as I was going through it was called the saboteur. It was
Yeah.
that person in your head that's saying, oh, you can't do this, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that might be. And I think even when we think we've put up the facade that nobody sees it, it bleeds out of us.
Oh,
It
of
just bleeds out,
course.
right? We fool ourselves
Yeah,
into thinking it's not there. Totally
totally.
agree with that. As we wrap this thing up, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Laura?
Well, folks, there's a couple ways. The first is, come and join me on the podcast Brave by Design. We talk about how ambitious women and allies can rise and thrive. We have lots of topics, and I'm angling now to get Patrick on the show. So you can enjoy more of us together over there. You can also find me at bravebydesign.net and join our Facebook community where I go live every Wednesday at noon Eastern.
Awesome. Thanks. This really has been such a joy to have this conversation. I really appreciate this.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thanks. Take care. As you can see, Laura really is the force of badassery. She gave so many valuable observations and recommendations in terms of how do we build courage. And I think as well, how do we create an environment where we're for others, being of service to others. And one of the questions that stands out to me is simply asking, how can I help today? How can I help today? And I think if more of us focus on that, of thinking, what can I do today to help others, we will be in such a better place going forward. My guess is you know somebody that you think would be interested in listening to this podcast, and I'd ask that you forward it on to them. If you haven't subscribed already, I'd ask that you do that. And it would mean the world to me if you would leave a rating or a comment on this or any other episode, because that's how this message continues to get out there. And together, we will be reimagining what leadership looks like. And until our next episode, I hope we're able to go out there and rise above your best.